Welcome back to your ongoing pursuit of your Bachelor's of Multifamily Science here at the Apartment Academy, the multifamily industry's only operations-focused podcast and your Institute of Higher NOI. I am your host, the Dean of the Apartment Academy, Daniel Cunningham. And today we had two guest professors here at the Academy, Reid Wicoff and David Staley. They are the co-founders of Digible, which is a digital marketing agency, and their offshoot Fiona, which is sort of a prop tech that helps plan and execute against a marketing spend. And we spent a bit today really diving deep into the different areas that now move the needle in terms of marketing. And I think it's an industry that's constantly evolving on this front, and best practices today don't necessarily mean that they're going to be best practices tomorrow. So it's a great episode to check in and see how you're doing in maximizing your marketing budget. Here they are. David and Reid, professors David and Reid, welcome to the Academy. Thanks for joining us here at Lecture Hall 101. We don't have dual professors very often, so this is certainly a treat for us. Thanks for joining us today.
I think it's more like you get half of a professor twice.
One's the TA, which I don't know. One of you guys has to.
No, that's me.
Do all the
100%.
grading.
Yeah. You can't trust him the rest of the podcast because that's totally inaccurate. David's the professor. I'm the TA.
Right on. Well, double the amount of information for our listeners, so we're winners either way. I want to start off talking about sort of how you guys came to the industry. You are co-founders of Digible, which has sort of two sides of the house. There's an agency side, there's a prop tech side. We want to understand those both a little bit. But the interesting is that neither one of you came from the industry. So often when we talk to founders of prop tech or other service industries on this program, they come from the industry. They were solving something that they themselves are wrestling with. What drew you to multifamily? What problems did you see that there were to solve? They're like, that's where we should focus.
I can start and David can finish, but I'd say it's more happenstance. So it wasn't that we were just kind of looking around for a different opportunity or category and that we had known each other for years dating back to college or something. Like you hear that story too. We actually intersected at a digital agency. So we both worked there. David was doing kind of enterprise sales and I was leading the sales initiatives. And so by happenstance, he came across a prominent property management company and was given an opportunity to just run some campaigns for him. And he had some success early with that and then quickly started, I'll say, just kind of building out a business inside of the agency because of how much they were appreciating, I'll say, his strategy, kind of forward thinking, things that probably they weren't getting as much of at the time. So this is about 8 years ago. And it really took off. And so for me, I was just noticing how much momentum, kind of the pace that he was scaling. And that's what was the catalyst really just for us to start talking about the industry a little bit more and saying, hey, is there something more here? And as we did start to spend more time within the industry, getting to know people and network, it became clear that there was a lot of opportunity in multifamily specifically just for disruption, both on the tech side, but as well as like just kind of the strategy and how plans are put together. So that's what led to us saying, hey, maybe we could start a business and focus vertically, within multifamily.
Let's start with the strategy side for a moment. What did you see? Like when you did your first campaign for this management company, did you do something different that like, oh, we never thought about doing it that way because you had this fresh perspective? What was the first notion you had that, hey, we could be disruptors in this industry because they're not doing X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, so we were really focused on local media, and Reid and I were working with other clients that were spending, $150,000 or $200,000 a month on their digital, and multifamily wasn't getting attention from any of our colleagues because the average budget was like $1,500, $2,000, and it just doesn't move the needle if they're if their goal is 200,000 a month to sell $1,500 campaign. So we were used to running way more sophisticated strategies and being way more hands-on. So making optimizations each month, changing the budget each month. But even though it was reoccurring revenue that just worked month to month for any of our other clients, that means we were used to doing reporting calls each month, changing the strategy and targeting each month. And the other vendors in the multifamily space just weren't really doing that because they could. People are used to the ILSs where they can buy a package in January and set and forget for the year. And so it wasn't part of like the habit of any of the other vendors or even necessarily the marketing people we were working with. And so once we started encouraging like, hey, let's get on the phone every month and change strategy and budget, maybe add or subtract platforms, that really won them over. And as Reid said, like within 18 months, I think we had like 400 different properties we were running campaigns for across a dozen management companies. And we hadn't seen any kind of growth like that anywhere else in the agency. And so it just made sense. The final thing I want to say is also the customers are so much better. So like, meaning they're a joy to work with. We were working otherwise with like HVAC, attorneys, automotive, and they're not exactly fun to like get on the phone with every month. Very demanding, not very accommodating, not empathetic. And so this industry, also won our hearts over.
Well, they say, starting companies, a lot of it is timing, and we didn't probably even recognize just how good the timing was because as David's saying, the clients are great. There was just this real thirst, curiosity. People were starving for change, but they didn't know where to get it, how to implement it. And so, they were working with a hatchet, as they say, instead of a scalpel. And a lot of that was, hey, just pour all your money into ILS, like David said, set and forget, and cross your fingers, that you don't look bad, I guess, the next month or that year. And so we introduced not just paid search, but, a variety of platforms in the digital space that they just didn't have a lot of familiarity with. And so that is what ignited, kind of the business and has ignited our growth.
I'd say, I couldn't agree more. For the period of time that I was on the operations side of the business, this was now, 10 years ago, but, it was like, get your ads up in Craigslist. And that's probably the extent of the innovation. The idea now that SEO matters, that paid search can move the needle. It seems like we're just, maybe I should ask that question. How long do you suppose the notion has been that those other strategies can have a meaningful impact on driving leases?
I'd say it depends on, like, there are different, there's always the early adopters and then there's the late adopters. And I would say we're probably more in the middle now where like half, the marketers in the space understand like they need to do more than just ILS and, for example, to get the most bang for their buck. I think there's also some of that's being caused because traditionally the spend has been on ILS. Like when we got in, it was 80% ILS, 20% non. And now it's starting to flip. And I think people are getting frustrated that their ILS, rep gives them an increase every year and yet not necessarily more value every year. And so they're starting to look elsewhere. We still recommend that the ILS, meaning don't just cancel it. Like definitely be thoughtful about it. Don't just buy the Diamond or Diamond Plus package, but it just shouldn't be like maybe the hub of your marketing strategy at this point.
Right. I want to come back to that, and I think one of the things that listeners would really benefit from, especially those who maybe aren't in organizations that are as forward thinking, they're on the laggard end of the adoption curve, is talk about what each of these things mean that you guys are bringing. What does paid search mean? What does that look like in the context of a multifamily environment? But I want to touch on, at some point, you guys, you start the agency, you have great adoption with people coming to the agency, the great success, and then some point along the way, you've identified this up with other opportunity to develop what you guys call Fiona. And so how did that happen? What is Fiona? How did that happen?
Yeah, well, the roots did come from the agency we were at before we started Digible, and there were a lot of sales reps, I'll say, that weren't as sophisticated or talented as David, and so that, for me, kind of running the operation was frustrating, and it seemed like some of these sales reps had great reputations, but they just weren't equipped to really have those kinds of conversations, regarding, the digital campaigns, and so we said, why not have a tool that could do this for them so that we can keep those relationships intact, but then really make it, a data-driven methodology, to building them. And so when we started Digible, it was really the same thing, except instead of, sales reps that we were trying to enable, is almost more like, well, David's very capable and we can build around that, but it's not scalable. And so it became more of a shift of like leveraging, relationships and building a tool that maximizes those relationships to more about scale. And it's like, and that is what we introduced to multifamily with Fiona, which is, hey, just plug in your budget and, we'll tell you how much to spend and where to spend it inside of a second. And then on top of that, we added some natural language generation that actually spells it out. And that was something else that was missing and still is in most BI platforms, is you don't get the so what or the data storytelling. Nothing really explains what you're seeing on these dashboards. And so with the advent of natural language generation, that makes it really easy. And probably I shouldn't say easy. Our VP of engineering would say it's not easy. But yeah, so when you see these recommendations, we make it, as David likes to say, plain English, that an operator, as much as a marketer, could both understand it. And that really helps bridge that gap that we know still exists in multifamily, which is like, I don't really get your perspective. I don't get yours. By having the explanations in there, it really helps simplify all of that communication.
And this is all based off of our principles of you should be adjusting your budget each month based on your need and the market trends. So, maybe when you're leasing up, you need to spend $8,000 a month. But once you hit 95% occupancy, do you need to still be buying that Diamond Plus package or spending $3,000 on paid search? No. But traditionally, the vendors in the space have locked you into contracts, or they don't necessarily, it's not in their best interest to recommend you pull down from that Diamond Plus or that $3,000 search campaign. So, the analogy we give is that Fiona is revenue management, but for marketing. So it will tell you throughout the year how to reduce your budget, but still hit your goal. So you might save some cash for a rainy day when your rent roll is a little bit off. And as Reid was saying, we learned from revenue management, they don't often give the so what. So let's build in the explanation so that you have more faith in the tool.
Very cool. So that instead of the model, as you were saying, what's not scalable is you can't spread David over 200 different multifamily accounts. Fiona provides sort of the insights that you would get from a one-on-one discussion with somebody within a digital agency, along with even the pricing recommendations, but in an automated fashion.
Exactly. And what we've seen in the industry in the last several years is, you asked kind of before we jumped on just about how things have evolved, is more and more you're seeing PMCs hiring analysts. They're probably spread too thin. They'll hire one six-figure analyst to try and sort through all the data and connect the dots. And, sometimes that involves marketing, sometimes it doesn't. But effectively, like, this tool is that six-figure analyst, and you can put it on every property instead of having one analyst that's centralized trying to figure out how to manage a 70 or 80 property portfolio, or even 10 properties. That's what you get when you add this tool.
Well, I think that's a great entree. Let's get into it, what it means to do an analysis, and what are the different levers that are now at the disposal of operators. And again, let's think about folks on site that maybe have not been involved in SEO, have not been exposed to paid search or some of the other things that the agency recommends. So walk us through what is the quiver full of? What are the arrows in your quiver that you guys bring to bear that represent kind of a holistic marketing approach? And how do you guys, what is it, if you can explain what each one means, like functionally, what happens when you're doing paid search? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, we have 8 platforms that are built into the, meaning 8 different marketing channels that are built into Fiona today, and that's based on scale and efficacy. So we've been able to prove that these platforms make a difference and can give you a recommendation based on the data for it. So the first 2 are usually ILS or paid search. So ILS, we look at anything from a CoStar to Rent to Zillow, and even break out what package makes sense on which ILS. Then the next platform that's often the largest part of the budget is paid search, which would be like Google advertising. So that's, some people know it as pay-per-click, but you're paying for each click that you get on Google, for example. And then you usually will have paid social behind that. So that's running like Facebook ads, Instagram ads, that kind of thing. And then SEO, so search engine optimization. So that's optimizing your website so it shows up naturally on Google instead of you having to pay Google to show up. And then there's other platforms that sort of come in on the tail end when it makes sense. So that might be geofencing. So that would be fencing anything as low as a kilometer radius around your location and serving ads to those people on their cell phone, for example, or display advertising. So that's like traditional banner ads that you might see on like ESPN or CNN. So the platform looks at all of these different channels, looks at your property, and looks at the market and says, okay, you're at 93% occupancy. You are going to churn 12 units in the next 3 months, and you want to hit 95. You should spend, I don't know, $4,000. And then we'll tell you how to spend that $4,000 across all of these different channels that we were just talking about.
So let's step through some of these that might be less familiar with folks. I think generally people understand advertising with CoStar, but paid search, you are essentially you competing by choosing selected targeted words that people will be searching for to appear in the first, definitely on the first page of the Google search results. I'm guessing everybody's kind of all competing for the same kind of words. Is there magic pixie dust you can bring to that equation that makes people better at paid search?
Yeah, I think it was, 2 years ago maybe, that CoStar announced they were spending $100 million themselves on Google. Effectively, if you look at the data, Apartments.com gets around 90% of its traffic from Google. And then they are just arbitraging it. They're buying that traffic for that $100 million and then reselling it to you when you buy a diamond package. So they are, if you think about it that way, they are making a spread on buying the inventory from Google and then selling you your diamond package. So if you do it right, you can arbitrage them and basically get the traffic for less. Now, they often are competing on like apartments for rent, like a very broad keyword, but that's not what you would want to do as a local, 200 unit property. You'd want to be very specific around your neighborhood, like maybe the amenities you offer, things like that. And even you could pre-qualify people before they get to your website. So as you said, you pick a certain set of keywords. I think our default is 3,000 keywords that we build out for each property. And then you run different types of ads. So depending on the keyword that you're targeting, like 1-bedroom apartments for rent, you might have a different ad that shows up there versus someone that's a 3-bedroom apartment for rent. And then we run, I think, usually 300 different ad variations. And then we just match the best ad to the best keyword. And usually you can end up buying the traffic for like, I don't know, $1.50 a click, something like that. And they tend to be highly engaged. And then you're not competing with, when you go to Apartments.com and you get to see your 8 competitors there, and they may submit those 8 different lead forms. They're now on your website, you own them, and they're not jumping over to your competitor.
Yeah, and just to add quickly, one of the biggest distinctions between paid search and ILS or directory advertising is one is performance-based and the other typically is not. Obviously, there's apartment list and there's some versions of performance-based ILS advertising, but a lot of it still is just, buy that package and you're going to fall where you fall and you'll be with all the rest of your competition. Whereas with Google, you're only paying for what people are clicking on. And the one other thing that I think is important as we talk about how things have evolved with digital marketing and advertising and multifamily is everybody's favorite topic of integrations. But Digible is integrated with a lot of the main property management systems. So when you're running those ads on Google, what you don't want to do is be spending money on inventory you don't have to rent. And so a lot of agencies in this industry for years were still doing that, where you might have 2-bedroom, 2-bath, or you're advertising for that, but you actually have already leased all that inventory up. And so why are you still spending on that? So if you actually integrated with the PMS systems, then you'll know what your inventory is and make sure that you're not inadvertently spending money on units that aren't available.
That's smart. That makes sense. 3,000 keywords, David. I'm stunned at that figure. That's amazing. Is Fiona yet smart enough to figure out what the keywords should apply and and advise what you should pay per click?
We have our own internal systems that aren't part of Fiona that do that. So it's not like our paid media person is writing 3,000 keywords. Basically, as Reid's saying, all these data integrations that we have determine that keyword list. Just on average, it's 3,000 keywords and 300 different ads. And then we run all that different ad copy to see which ad performs best. I do think the biggest thing I want to point out for those, sort of like on operations or, property managers listening, is that you don't, for paid search, you don't have to get stuck into a 12-month agreement. So you can, as Reid was saying, performance marketing, you could say, I need to spend $2,000 right now, but then 3 months from now, you might not need to spend $500 because you're, as he was saying, you're 98% leased, for example. So let's not keep spending just in perpetuity, as a set it and forget it, as I was saying earlier.
Yeah, and I think the other point you just made about, I'm sure not only are people doing that, they're probably paying for marketing for product that they don't have an inventory for anymore, and that's impossible to keep up with manually, I'm sure. So that's a great point as well. Okay, so that's paid search. Paid social. Let's touch on that one for a little. Like, what does that mean? What's functionally happening when you're paying for social placement?
Yeah, that's ads on typically Facebook and Instagram is what most people are doing these days. And so that might be, well, I mean, everyone's seen it at this point. I know Nicole, my wife, and our third co-founder, she gets sucked into Instagram ads all the time. So, everyone has seen those ads, but you're targeting renters on those platforms. And they tend to be more brand awareness because someone's not it's not intent-based like Google where they're saying, I want a one-bedroom today. It tends to be more, hey, you look to be in our target, and so therefore, let's show an ad to you and hope that it builds awareness around the product.
That may lead us to fair housing here pretty quickly because there's been a lot of friction specifically with Facebook and fair housing and multifamily, which we can get to in a minute. But I would just say the biggest difference between paid social and paid search is one is, as David said, more branding, but more about trying to get the experience of the property out. So you have the visuals, you have the video, photos, things like that. When you see an ad on Google, it's pretty much all copy. And so when people are thinking, how should I approach these two channels? One is just a step below, meaning very bottom of the funnel with Google. But paid search, you have a better opportunity to really convey the experience of a property.
Is there a certain life cycle of the property that's more appropriate for the paid social? Because we used to struggle with that as well. Like, does this drive any leases? But we never knew. Like, there was a customer acquisition cost. It was hard to calculate there. But is that something that's more important early on, lease up stage, and then you let it drop off, or does it remain important throughout the whole life cycle of an asset?
I like that you brought that up because understanding your goals and what you're going to see as your core KPI is very important. So attribution is still an issue, particularly as Google, removes cookies and we go to more of a cookieless world. It's harder and harder to track people throughout the funnel. So, for example, we were the first real estate TikTok partner in the U.S. And TikTok is, cool. All the young folks seem to be using it these days. And there's not a lot of competition there for apartments if you're running ads on TikTok. However, it's very hard to track, did I get a lease from this TikTok ad? It's basically impossible. So what we try to educate people on is, what is your goal? Like, they may come to us saying, I want to run TikTok. Like a marketer or an on-site person would be like, great, well, what is your goal, though? And they're like, I want phone calls. It's like, well, we can't prove phone calls from TikTok, so maybe we should be looking at something else that we can prove phone calls from. And once we earn their trust by hitting that KPI, then over time we can educate them and say, okay, do you want to build more awareness? And this is more about impressions. So how many people saw my ad, but not necessarily how many people called from that ad, because it's just the attribution problem is just unsolved by anybody.
Just to add, I think one of the things that helps operators understand the value of things that aren't just performance-based, kind of bottom funnel channels is if you look on the back end on the analytics, you can see, are we seeing more activity on floor plans? Are we seeing more activity on amenities? So those are great indicators, leading indicators that you're doing something right as far as driving qualified traffic that will ultimately result in conversions. And so when we add some of those called secondary or tertiary platforms, that's when we often will see that lift. But we don't look for it, as David's saying, on necessarily a form fill or a phone call directly from that channel. What we're trying to see is, are we motivating more kind of, call it shoppers or potentially interested, prospects, renters.
Maybe this is a tangent here for a moment, but you talked about showing intent. I'm on the software side of the world now with Leonardo 24/7, and there are people trying to sell me intent data all the time. We were watching people and their buying behaviors or their browsing behaviors, and we're able to assess that there's intent that they want to buy a property operations maintenance system. Is there an analog in the multifamily world where you can somehow glean intent from people that are browsing because, we think this person's looking for an apartment?
Yeah, that exists on almost all of those platforms. So,
Psychographic.
Yeah, well, also, like, if someone's been to apartments.com, Google and Facebook know that. And so they will then bucket these people as renters, as part of your renter audience. So that's intent data. Now, what I think we should be taking from other industries is a good analog here is automotive. But automotive, people don't often buy a car straight from, whatever dealership's website. Like, they will look on the website and then they'll walk in. They may not want to schedule an appointment because they don't want to give out their personal information and get hounded, right? And so the way automotive has found their analog is it's called vehicle page description views, so VPD views, and they're basically looking at how many people viewed a car on the website after they started a whatever campaign, Facebook, TikTok, Spotify. And then they will say, well, on average, for every 6 people that look at a car on our website, we sell 1 car. And so they're just trying to say, let's get as many 6 views of a car as possible because that will equal a sale. Apartments doesn't do that, but it's very clear that it's similar, that how many people viewed that 1 bedroom, how likely is it then to sell? But this industry, multifamily, we're just lagging behind on that kind of, data analytics that Reid's talking about. So that's a lot of the education that we try to do, but it still doesn't help if an on-site person understands that concept. Explaining it to the ownership group or asset manager may be a real challenge. So it's just what we find we have to do a lot of is educate our customer on how to talk to these things to their, decision maker.
I want to come back to that. I think that's an interesting point to make. I want to ask one more feature that you recommended, because I personally I find it very sexy, which is the geo fencing, presenting an ad when somebody is in a certain location. Tell me about how has that evolved? How effective is that? What are they? In what app are they when they receive a geo located ad?
Yeah, I mean, it's now probably more commonly called location-based marketing, because I think when geo first, the advent of it, it was predominantly app-based and still is, because it's more accurate when the inventory or the advertising is coming through apps, just based on the location data. But you can also get it through mobile web and things like that. But the idea is that if you're coming by in a property, maybe you live there or you're working in the area, that once you come into that radius, you would be served a display ad, and it could be you're on CNN app, as David was saying, or ESPN, or it could be that you're just on mobile web, and that would be a chance to intercept them. And so because you understand that somebody might live in the area, work in the area, that they potentially could be a good prospect for your property. And so it's evolved as far as the sophistication, and that's probably not super valuable for this discussion as far as how the sausage is made or how it's changed. But one of the challenges with location-based marketing that's come up more and more in multifamily is fair housing, is just what's acceptable, what's not. We don't want to get in any trouble, find ourselves with a demand letter because we're using too much of this sophisticated digital marketing tactics, targeting measures, things like that, intent. And so Digible has actually created a fair housing tool specifically for that reason, and geofencing's a good example. But just what is kosher, what's not, when you're using all these kind of powerful tools to find just the right prospect at just the right time. And Facebook actually got themselves in a pickle, with HUD a few years ago because they had enabled too much targeting. So whether it was intentional or not, there was things that marketers were doing that were actually discriminating against a lot of the federally protected classes, not to get into the local, in the way that they were serving ads. And so it's become, really important that you're mindful of that, and we're trying to help that out too, just by creating a platform that does it for you. So
how often, I'm going to come back, David, to what you had said about, sort of managing up from a marketing standpoint, folks on site that maybe want to try something, or they feel like there's a strategy's not working. large, I don't know, 10,000 unit portfolio, maybe smaller, they tend to have, VPs of marketing at corporate. How does one as an operator on site advocate for any one of these strategies upwards in the organization?
Yeah, I think it's very important to identify the goals. Well, I guess I'll back up a quick second here. But Digible, we're about to hit 6 years old, and we now have more than 70 employees, and we have none of those employees are sales reps. So on purpose, we don't have a sales rep because we want the client experience to be consultative, and so nobody's ever commissioned, bonused on any sales. They're supposed to earn trust. And the way that they earn trust is usually a marketer comes to us or an on-site person or an owner and says, hey, I'm confused. I don't really trust that my marketing is working, or I just want to look at things differently. Could you do a quick look at it? And we always then usually start with an audit or just like a strategy, session. And that's free, just to say like, hey, are we even a good fit, or are things working really well already? And you just needed the confidence that they're working well. And through that, we're always asking, what is your goal? Is your goal phone calls, form fills, tours? And then from there, we help design a strategy around it, and we explain to them why. And so to Reid's point on giving the explanation behind all these complicated products, a lot of times you just have to give 3 bullet points about like, we're going to try this strategy with Google because XYZ. And then they have those 3 bullet points that they can now go to their decision maker, and their decision maker is like, wow, you really thought this through. That's great. And then the next month when they do a reporting call, we give them another 3 bullets. Hey, we're going to make this tweak because of XYZ. And so every month we are basically just dripping more information on them that they can now take and use, as you're saying, to manage up. And we've just had to operationalize that. So our team actually hits a client 3 times a month, no matter what. And they're giving that strategy information mid-month and end of month, no matter what, even if the client doesn't want to get on the phone. And by always going with that sort of like 3-bullet mentality, it allows people to just slowly, take a bite of the elephant until, 6 months in, they're running circles around folks that haven't, aren't familiar with digital.
This is all fascinating to me, guys. I got to say, it was always, when I first got into the business, I said about people, product, price, like all the different P's to move the needle in leasing. The marketing part was always the hardest. It seemed like there was always the most black magic behind it. That if you were good at it, it was obvious. If you were bad at it, it was obvious. So very interesting that you go sort of democratize this through Fiona and access to the folks at Digible. What's next? What's coming? What should we be looking for? How's ChatGPT going to affect the market? How are bots affecting marketing? Talk for a little bit here about what the next 2-3 years of marketing looks like.
Reid pointed at me first. For marketing, Reid and I just did a prediction episode on our own podcast, Digible Dudes. And what we've seen as we've done that prediction episode the last, 4 years maybe, is unfortunately this industry moves rather slowly. So for apartment marketing, I don't think that much is really going to change. I think it's going to be a lot more of the same. It's just we're this battleship, right? Where it's like, okay, you still have 85% of properties on the ILSs. They're slowly getting educated about where maybe they should be moving spend to other platforms and be more variable. I do think you're going to see more competitors come in because of the enablement of different chat AIs like ChatGPT. My real concern with that is, as Reid was saying, fair housing. We've all seen the news headlines about ChatGPT just being aggressive to somebody or providing a bad recommendation because it's trained on the internet like Reddit and such, and that can be a bad training data set. And as we've seen, as Reid mentioned, HUD with Facebook, the big players, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, they don't understand fair housing, and so the platforms are not trained on protected classes. And then therefore if you're a startup that's going to use ChatGPT, you run the risk of it violating fair housing because it thinks it's a good experience to ask about your age, gender, and source of income, when that's, we need to stay away from that. So I think you're going to see more chatbots pop up, but I think you're going to see some problems from things like that.
Yeah, I'd add that I think the two biggest movements that are happening, one is integration. So I think there's a much higher expectation that's not going to slow down on agencies like Digible or folks that are running advertising and marketing for properties, that they are integrated as well. And that can also drive better NOI, not just better marketing performance, which obviously speaks very much to market or to operators. And then just, being smarter with your pay or with your paid spend. I like to say, things working smarter, not harder. And that really comes through with conversion rates. So a lot of times when we talk to clients, people are just consumed with how many leads are we getting, how many leads, conversions, but it's like, well, what's the actual rate of those conversions? Because it doesn't do you a lot of good, and it can really tick off some of the leasing agents down on site if they're just getting fatigued by bad leads. And so I feel like the industry is starting to step forward more and more and understand that and say, okay, we really need to be focused on conversion rates, not just conversions. So between the integrations and having your advertising work smarter, not harder, I think those are some of the bigger changes you'll see picking up here in the next few years.
I want to highlight what Reid said. So this industry caused this issue where they just pushed all of the lead platforms to give them more leads. That then caused the on-site teams to say, well, I get 100 leads a day, I close one of them, like average conversion rate. And so they ended up getting lead fatigue. And then that then caused, well, how do we filter through these garbage leads? Let's get a chat bot or an AI to intercept the leads to pre-qualify the lead. So you see all this middleware happening because we've been asking for more leads at the source. And Apartment List is the one that's picked on the most because they're like, well, you only pay for the lead you get, so we'll send you 100 or 200 leads. And then people complain, I just get garbage from this. So if we sent higher quality leads to start, which then means your chief KPI doesn't become how many leads I get, but the quality of the lead I get, then you don't need as much middleware like the Better Bots or Meta Leases or whatever of the world, which are great products because of the symptom we have. So we just are treating the symptom and not the problem.
And ad spend. So you eliminate a lot of the middleware, meaning on the technology, and then you also eliminate some of the ad spend that's needed to get leased up.
Yeah.
Interesting. This seems like we could launch a separate series talking just about that. But I want to wrap up today. Really compelling stuff. I think we'll probably title this the 8 legs of the stool here instead of the 3. But if people are interested, want to know more, how do they reach out to you guys?
If they, as we mentioned, we don't have any salespeople. They can always learn more about Digible at digible.com, and for Fiona, they can get there by myfiona.com. But if they're just more interested in knowledge and thought leadership, then they can find our podcast at Digible Dudes and just listen in. They could just be lurkers. They don't have to talk to anybody.
And hello at Digible, isn't that our?
Oh yeah.
Our email. Yeah.
You can't tell. We don't. Not only do we not have any salespeople, but we only got an internal marketer a month ago. So. Yeah.
And you are not salespeople yourselves. Otherwise, right? The email would have come right off the top of your tongue. Well, I think what you guys shared today is super valuable. There's so much, I keep saying this, murkiness around what's effective marketing, what works, what isn't. Great to have a tool like Fiona out there and an agency like Digible to help people navigate that. So thanks for coming on, guys. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us at this week's episode of the Apartment Academy podcast. The Apartment Academy is a production of Leonardo 24/7, the industry's leader in multifamily operations and maintenance software. At Apartment Academy, we realize the hard work that goes into property management and the stress that comes along with it. Leonardo 24/7 takes the guesswork out of your team's day-to-day by providing customized daily guidance on tasks that need to be done, guaranteeing consistent operations across your entire portfolio. To learn more, visit www.leonardo247.com today.